Tony on my page, Unapologetically Black, ADOS. Ask that you like and subscribe to the page. I want to talk to you today because the Republicans are constantly talking about this two-tier legal system while they're constantly empowering an unjust legal system.
That came down today from the Supreme Court. One of them is just unbelievably dreadful. Folks, the case is Jones versus Hendricks. And this is what the Supreme Court has ruled in a 6-3 decision. And it impacts future cases involving prisoners who seek to challenge their convictions based on an intervening change in interpreting a criminal statute. In the ruling, the Supreme Court denied Marcus D'Angelo Jones' petition for a writ of habeas corpus that dealt with his conviction and the sentencing. And the case concerned two statutes, which provides post-conviction remedies for federal prisoners. He was convicted in 2000 on 2 counts of unlawful firearm possession by a felon, and one count of making false statements to acquire a firearm. Now, what's crazy here is that he contends that the federal courts got the sentencing wrong, got the conviction wrong. So he felt that he should be resentenced. The courts, they made it, you understand? At the federal courts made a mistake. They actually made a mistake. But they went, sorry, dude, can't help you. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, folks, issued a blistering 50-page decision. I'm going to read some of that from you in just a second. I want to bring in my panel right now to talk about this. Because
not only that, the Supreme Court has also ruled that innocence is not justification for overturning a conviction, even in cases that involve the death penalty. You have to understand the lack of humanity in this legal system, and you have to understand that these unjust white people who are claiming that this system is working against them is empowering a system that is stripping freedom. See, it's not saying this applies strictly to black people. It's just known that it will be overly applied to black people, but it still strips white people of their freedom. But they're willing to do that because they need the system and the means to oppress you, black people. Your frivolous attempts to be one with these Europeans is leading towards your demise and the demise of your children.
the journalist writes this in her piece in Slate, Reese. It says, it's also important to note that the pattern here. Last term, in one of the more ghastly Supreme Court decisions, the same 6-3 majority from Jones ruled for Arizona in a case where the state had loudly and proudly argued that, quote, innocence is not enough to remedy a conviction for innocent persons convicted in state courts. In that case, incarcerated individuals sought to introduce evidence that they didn't commit the crime they were convicted of or were not even eligible for the death sentence they received. One of the individuals, Barry Jones, had successfully persuaded 2 federal courts and 4 judges that he probably didn't commit the crime for which he had been sentenced to death.
Now, I know your parents have always taught you and told you the truth will set you free. That only applies when dealing with just and honest people. When you're dealing with people who deal and thrive in deception, the truth will only further dig you in your grave. This is why I am a separatist from white people at every level. This is why I say to you, that whites and blacks cannot coexist. There will be no melting pot.
The court said, too bad. It's illegal for a federal court to consider evidence of his innocence, even if that evidence wasn't ever introduced because the state appointed him an ineffective lawyer. After the 2022 midterm election resulted in a Democratic Attorney General, Barry Jones successfully, let me repeat that, Reese. After the 2022 midterm election resulted in a Democratic Attorney General, Barry Jones successfully negotiated a plea agreement resulting in his release, though this Supreme Court would have allowed the state to execute him.
Now I want you to think about the inhumanity of this behavior from the district attorney from Nevada, who went and argued that this person proving his innocence should not justify them overturning his death sentence conviction. You're looking at a Supreme Court that just has ruled that a person's innocence does not justify the overturning of their conviction, even if that conviction entails a death sentence. I want you, do you see the lack of humanity in that? Do you see their legal system is an unjust system? Do you see their legal system lacks humanity? I need you to see this, because if you see how their legal system lacks humanity, then you can see how their legal system placed you in the inhumane system of cattle slavery. If you pay attention to the legal system and learn the smallest bit of history, then you will learn you was enslaved not through them going to Africa and enslaving black people. You was enslaved through the legal system in America. American cattle slavery happened through their legal system here in America. They was here, and after they was here, they set up a legal structure, and then they enslaved you under that legal structure.
Of John Kasor as a lifelong servant, as it established Anthony Johnson, a African-American, as the first documented slave owner, and John Kasor as the first documented lifetime slave. In 1655, Anthony Johnson won a court case that allowed him to maintain ownership of John Kasor as a lifelong servant, as it established Anthony Johnson, a African-American, as the first documented slave owner, and John Kasor as the first documented lifetime slave. In 1655, Anthony Johnson won a court case that allowed him to maintain ownership of John Kasor as a lifelong servant, as it established Anthony Johnson, a African-American, as the first documented slave owner, and John Kasor as the first documented lifetime slave.
A black man was documented as the first slave owner with a black slave named John Kasor, but Anthony Johnson started off with 5 indentured servants, 4 white, 1 black. Get that? 4 white, 1 black indentured servant. John Kasor left. He sued, saying John Kasor left early, and the courts ordered John Kasor, this was in Virginia after the Beacon Rebellion, ordered that John Kasor be sentenced to life indentured servitude to Anthony Johnson. See, Anthony Johnson played into the white people's game, and then 10 years later, Anthony Johnson, they was ruled that blacks could not own land, and Anthony Johnson land was later taken from him and his family. His children was enslaved.
3 men on the same farm, doing the same labor, being harassed and oppressed on a comparable level, to the point that these 3 men chose to flee their owner.
John Punch, Victor, and James Gregory crossed the Virginia border into southern Maryland. Days later, they were captured and returned.
Plaintiff, please step forward. State your case. My lord, I ask your punishment against these indentured servants.
In the colony's highest court, it was said that Hugh Gwynn's servants caused him considerable loss and prejudice.
I want you to punish them, my lord. You will serve 3 more years.
The 2 white men are sentenced to simply a number of years added to their indentures. For John Punch, the one black among these 3 men, his fate is infinitely worse. It's servitude for life.
For the rest of your life.
For many of you who don't understand, Anthony Johnson had 5 indentured servants. One of them was black, John Carcer. However, John Carcer was the one who was sentenced to him life as indentured servant. If you look at the other case with John Punch, there was 3 indentured servants, but however, only one of them was black. But the black was sentenced to life indentured servitude. So you see that the continuous showing that the legal system is what led us into slavery, not them going to Africa gaining slave ships. So while you're looking for them to go and capture slaves in that form that they show you cattle slavery, the truth is that their legal system is what they use to enslave you here in America. You was already here. And there's plenty of evidence to indicate that. Not only do you have those 2 cases, you also have the fact that they passed miscegenation laws showing that whites and blacks were being married as early as the 1600s. So to say that they brought black people over here solely as slaves and white women was marrying slaves makes no sense. And you see that they passed the miscegenation laws so that they will only enslave the black men. So what we as black people have to understand, we have to withdraw from their political and their legal system, because their legal system has what was used to transport us or to place us into cattle slavery. It was not transporting us from another country. Whereas the first anti-miscegenation laws in the United States were enacted in Maryland in 1661, where miscegenation was typically a felony under state law prohibiting interracial marriages punishable by imprisonment or hard labor. Let's be clear. Imprisonment, hard labor was all sentenced to slavery. America did not have a prison complex in 1661. America did not have prisons in 1661. This was a law enacted to enslave black people.
However, in the 17th century in colonial Virginia, Africans and English could be allies, lovers, parents, and married.
Landowning gentlemen of the crown cannot afford another rebellion.
We must divide the poor.
We must divide the poor. We must separate the races.
Separate the races.
African,
English,
Scottish,
Indian. We must break the alliance between the poor.
Break the alliance.
All in favor? Aye. All opposing? The measure passes.
We are no longer allowed.
To marry?
We are no longer allowed.
To start a family?
We are no longer allowed. Can we say aloud?
Should we stay inside?
That we have a child?
Can we stay alive?
We're not coming out.
Why are we vilified?
Let's go underground.
We are no longer allowed to carry a child. We are no longer allowed
to exchange vows We are no longer allowed. I am her father.
Are you all right?
And you are my wife.
This isn't right.
They're not taking our daughter.
Let them try.
That's on my life. Be it enacted.
Be it enacted.
No Negro.
No Negro.
No mulatto.
No mulatto.
No Indian.
No Indian.
Be it enacted. Be it enacted.
Be it enacted.
Be it enacted. Be it enacted. Be it enacted.
Be it enacted.
That no minister
Be it enacted.
shall hereafter marry a white.
Be it enacted. That no minister shall hereafter marry a white with a Negro or mulatto or Indian.
Be it enacted. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves
that all
shall be held
children
as property.
of Negroes, of mulattoes,
I will be held
of
as property
slaves will be slaves
until the day I die.
Let's be clear. American judicial system was blacks' passage to slavery. Not any slave ship. You was not kidnapped and brought over here and placed in slavery. They used their legal structure in order to enslave you. The same thing they are doing today. John Kaser, John Punch were both enslaved due to America legal system. They was not kidnapped in Africa and brought over here. Miscegenation laws enslaved black men who was married to white women and those mulatto children who was also married to those. It also indentured enslaved white women who was married to those black men. Yeah. So the legal system, it would lead blacks into slavery. The American legal judicial system is black America's passageway to slavery. And it is our next passage back to slavery. This is why white people are so stuck on the Supreme Court. This specific ruling right here that says we can lock you up, wrongly convict you, and leave you no recourse to appeal or to right our wrongs.